Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for that enlightening speech. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, can I request a little bit of silence? I do understand that there is some commotion at the back because the food is out. There's plenty for everybody. Everyone will get a bite. But if we can just respect and maintain the candour of this event. I would now like to introduce the next heavyweight of today, and that is Dr. Con Kafataris. Dr. Con is the leader of the Australian Christian Alliance. He is a key player in the formation of the Australian Religious Alliance, and he's composed various reports on ex-LGBT bills and other issues. His main work pertains to the free practice of faith without infringement. Dr. Con, please come up and we'll be on to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm no stranger to this community. Great. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Great. Well, before we begin, I'm just going to tell you guys to fasten your seatbelts because I'm going to speak fast and furious. The information is going to come at you thick and fast, and that's deliberate because I find that in this space, a lot of people are asleep. So I'm here to try and wake you up. Don't worry, for any information you want, we're freely available the slides from the organisers. Please see the organisers if anybody wants access that they can't get. So strap yourselves in and enjoy the ride. Firstly, I want to talk about, I've titled my talk, Conversion Therapy Laws. Go back a bit, please. They're a cure for a disease that doesn't exist. Okay, and I want to talk about why they're so damaging. So, does my laser pointer work? Yes, but you can't see it. Forget it. Okay, next slide. Yep, next slide. Okay, so the question is, what are conversion therapy laws and why should we have them? Well, the supporters basically say that people are being forced to change their sexual orientation against their will. They're being forced to convert, okay? So you're homosexual and we want to force you to become heterosexual, to convert yourself. That's why they're called conversion therapy. And they say that these therapies, these forced conversions, actually cause suicide. So young people who are gay or lesbian, we force them to renounce that and they end up killing themselves. But I want to challenge, is this really true? Well, in the 1960s and 70s, they did use aversion therapy. They used shock treatment and stuff like that for people who were homosexual because it was illegal back then and it was still considered a disorder. But that was 50 years ago, all right? In Australia, 2023, I mean, let me ask you this. If someone comes out now publicly, do we condemn that person or do we cheer them on? We cheer them on in 2023. Everyone, oh, they're so brave. They're so, we stand up and we applaud their courage. So, today in Australia, when people come out, it's celebrated. Forced conversions, okay, anyone that's being forced to convert, shock treatment and all that stuff, that's actually assault. So if that's happening, there should be police records, okay? It's illegal, it's against the law, and it should be referred to the police. But what has been happening has been treatment for people with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion. I stress that word, unwanted. So it's a little bit like any conventional psychotherapy, okay? You've got a problem with something, you want to go and get help, but no one is being forced to convert against their will. I've got something up here. If you're gay and you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, okay? So my challenge, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, give me hard evidence that people are being forced to convert in New South Wales right now. Okay, give us the evidence, give us the facts, give us the police reports. I don't want anecdotes and things like that because anybody can make that stuff up. Give me hard facts. So far, no one's given me any. Next slide. So let me talk about the propaganda behind the agenda, what the debate is not about. It's, as I said, not about shock treatment or IFPAs. Mark Latham, before the election, I like this quote, he said that stuff went out with cardigans, in other words, the 1960s and 70s. It's not about forcing someone to change their orientation. It's not about tolerance or diversity. We hear those words a lot, tolerance and diversity. Well, what do they actually mean? Tolerance, you don't tolerate things you agree with. You tolerate things you disagree with. Things you agree with, you celebrate. So tolerance means that you recognize my right to believe something that you don't agree with, and I recognize your right to believe something you don't agree with. A lot of people in the room are of the Islamic faith. I'm of a Christian faith. We respect each other's rights to have differing views. That's tolerance. And diversity, is by definition difference. So true diversity means we're going to have differences of opinion, which means there are going to be people that don't agree with you. Okay? Next slide. What it's really about, this is the agenda behind the propaganda. So the last slide I gave you the propaganda. Now I want to tell you what it's really about. It's not about tolerance and diversity, but it's about affirmation. You don't have the right to disagree with the rainbow lifestyle. You don't have the right to disagree with that. You have to agree with it. That's what they want. Okay? And how are they going to do that? They're going to silence and cancel anybody who disagrees with them. They're going to try and silence and cancel people like me. And I'll talk about later how they do it. They also want to silence and ultimately remove all scriptural opposition to the rainbow lifestyle. When I say rainbow lifestyle, LGBTQI, whatever, okay, I just don't want to use that. So use that word rainbow just to catch everybody, okay? Let me give you, here's the problem they have. We've got these pesky things called scriptures, because no matter how the LGBT people like to cut it up, the Quran and the Bible do not affirm homosexuality, all right? The Bible calls it sin, and the Quran calls it haram, okay? And no matter which the way they try and slice it up, they're not going to change that. It's also about taking away the rights of parents to teach their children anything that does not line up with the lifestyle. And it's about taking away the rights of adults or children with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion to get help. If your kids in future end up having gender confusion, you want to get them help, right? Well, this is about taking away that. Next slide. I want to say what it should be about. It should be about speaking for those who cannot speak for themselves. It should be the rights of parents to raise their children according to their faith. Okay? I want to raise my children according to my faith. You want to raise your children according to your faith. That's what it should be about. And it should be about adults and kids who want to get help for unwanted feelings of same-sex attraction to get help. And it should be about the rights of people of faith to live life that are consistent with their faith and values. Even that means being celibate and renouncing same-sex attraction. Next slide. Now, we already have conversion therapy laws in 3 jurisdictions in Australia. Started in Queensland, which was bad enough, went to ACT, which is even worse, and now it's in Victoria. The Victorian bill is the worst of all, and I want to drill down the Victorian bill to show you what could be coming here. I'm not saying we'll adopt this bill 100%, but it has been talked about as a template by some. In Victoria, anyone who wants therapy for unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion, you cannot get help. Your only choice is either affirm the desire, embrace it, or suffer in silence. So basically, if you've got unwanted feelings of depression in Victoria, you can get counselling. You've got unwanted feelings of alcoholism or drug addiction in Victoria, you can get counselling. But if your child or your child has unwanted gender confusion, can you get counselling? No, you cannot. You have to suffer in silence. Any advice to, in other words, you tell somebody, look, the scripture doesn't support this, okay, that's a change or suppression practice, that's illegal. And it includes, the Victorian bill includes prayer or counselling. So you religious leaders in the room, listen to this. Prayer or counselling is illegal, all right? Any publishing advice, all right? Going out, you want to take your child outside Victoria to get help. Sorry, that's illegal too. All right. Publishing the idea that people can change their orientation, SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity. Publishing that idea is illegal, a $10,000 fine. I'm going to refer to this study that I co-authored, okay, on this, and we had to get this published before the Victorian bill came in. If we didn't, all of the authors of us, we would have been up to $10,000 fine each. And the maximum penalties are 10 years jail, $500,000 fine. Let that sink in. Now, next slide. While I talked about those jail penalties, that's not where I think the real action is. The real action will be in the civil scheme. And I've titled the slide, "The Process is the Punishment." Because in Victoria now, the Equal Opportunity Human Rights Commission has the power to investigate anonymous complaints of change or suppression practice. So anonymous, hear that? Anonymous, with no statute of limitations. So you might do this, you might give somebody advice now, and they can complain in 20 years' time. 20 years later, they can complain. You'll be summoned before that commission, $11,000 fine if you don't attend, and they will either give you the choice, stop saying that or stop doing it, or they can refer you to APRA if you're a health professional like me, or Dr. Ali, or they can send you to the police, right? And then what happens then is people are dragged through months or years of litigation. If anyone wants to know what it's like to be dragged through these tribunals, ask Lyle Shelton. Here's the guy that was the chairman of the Coalition for Marriage during the same-sex marriage campaign. He objected to transgender story time. You've heard of that? Transgender story time? You know, drag queen story time? He objected to that online in Queensland. They made a complaint about him 3 years ago, and it's still going. It hasn't stopped. His legal costs are $150,000 and counting. All right? So that's what I mean by the process becomes the punishment. My question is, how many parents would take things this far? How many of you would stick in it for 3 years? How many would just give up and say, I'm never talking about this ever again? Well, guess what? By doing that, they've achieved their goal. Remember I said they want to silence you? Well, that's how they're going to do it. Next slide. And I've titled this, The Devil is in the Details, because what I've got here is a quote from the Victorian Bill itself. I call it a dangerous definition leads to a slippery slope. I won't read the whole thing. I want to look at the underlying section. So this is quoted from the Act. The definition of the Act says that no sexual orientation or gender identity constitutes a disorder, disease, illness, deficiency, or shortcoming. Now, I've underlined it. It's not in the Act itself. And it says that a person's sexual orientation or gender identity is not broken or in need of fixing. Now, here's a problem. Because many religions say that certain sexual orientations are a shortcoming or disorder. The Greek word for sin is amartia, which means to miss the mark. That's a shortcoming. So here's a problem. You've got the Act of Parliament, the law, saying that what your scripture says is false. Anyone see the problem with that? So when a clash comes, when you've got to either follow what your scripture says or follow what the law says, you're going to have to decide, but you won't be able to do both on this definition. And remember, what I've got here is orientation is about your desires or proclivities. What about the person whose orientation or desires is for people under the age of 16? Okay, if no sexual orientation is broken, then how can we condemn that person for acting on those desires? What future laws could this result in? Now listen, don't throw rocks at me. I'm not saying that every LGBT person wants to have sexual relations with someone under the age of 16. I'm saying that if the law says that no orientation is wrong, then how can you stop that? I'm giving you the logical conclusion of that definition. Next slide. Now, from here I'll just talk briefly. So, if they want to, one of the reasons they want to ban the law, they say that they want to ban the therapy. They say, the therapy doesn't work. It's discredited and dangerous. Let's have a look at that. I'm holding up here, okay, a study, 78 ex-LGBT people that we got from around the world. Okay, these are the only ones we could get to go public. There are tens of thousands more. 2 Muslim men are actually in our cohort. They've got different backgrounds from 18 to 66, different education, professions, religion, race. Some had religious counselling, some had professional counselling, some had both, some had no counselling. Most of the people had prayer support. The majority of cases there was change. 75% of people had less suicide, 94% less anxiety, 95% better self-image, 80% less promiscuity. The change that happened was significant. The average drop in suicides was 40%. That's 4 out of 10, okay? 4 out of 10 less suicides. Anxiety, 50%, drop in anxiety, 50%, promiscuity, 46%. Their orientation changed. So of the people that were homosexual before the treatment, 70% of them became heterosexual, with 53% of them exclusively heterosexual. A lot of them actually got married and had kids, all right? Of those with gender confusion, 100% of them ended up being happy with their biological sex. So does that sound like something that's discredited and dangerous and doesn't work? No, it actually worked. And you can see by the bottom, right? The change was long-lasting. 22% of the people had their therapy 30 years ago. 30 years ago they had this treatment, all right? And it's persisted. 72% of them had their therapy more than 10 years ago. So we're not talking about flash in the pan or fly by night. Now, for anyone who wants copies of this study, I've got a couple of hard copies. There'll be a copy to a link to the study with the organisers. Next slide. Now, I've had some people say, oh yeah, but this doesn't affect me. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm heterosexual. My kids are okay. Let's have a look at whether that's actually right. I submit that all of us have children that we love or know people that have children that we love. Could be your niece, could be your nephew, could be whatever. As the society becomes more and more gay affirming and with social media, the risk of gender confusion is going to rise exponentially. I'm holding up a book here called Irreversible Damage, Teenage Girls and the Transgender Craze. It was released about a year ago, and she researches the explosion in gender confusion that's happening because of social media, especially among teenage girls. So if you think your kids are not going to be exposed to this stuff or affected, you're wrong. I'm sorry. It's already happening, and it's going to happen to your kids and my kids unless we do something about it. So what the risk that this being affected will only rise and rise. What's going to happen to those kids and if their parents cannot get any help for those desires? How many of them will suicide or self-harm? I've just shown you evidence that the treatment stops suicides. If we ban the treatment, okay, how many kids will self-harm? Will that be one of your children? Will that be one of your cousins? Will it be one of your grandchildren for the older people over, in the room? So the bottom line is we all have a dog in this fight. Next slide. So what about New South Wales? Well, the openly gay MP for Sydney, Alex Greenwich, has already flagged conversion therapy laws, and he mentioned the conversion, the Victorian bill, in his release. Chris Minns and Dominic Perrottet promised to ban them. So before the election, both of them promised to ban these laws. They promised to bring them in, and they made some promises here and say, "Oh, we won't ban preaching, we won't ban prayer." But let me ask you, how much power does Minns really have in government? He's not in majority, he governs in minority. And one of the people who supports Minns as Premier is Alex Greenwich, the guy who talked about bringing them in the first place. And how much power does he have in the ALP? There are people in the ALP, okay, powerful people in the ALP that want these laws and are very pro-LGBT. So he doesn't have that. How much power the question you've got to ask is, how much power does he have in the party? How much power does he have in the parliament? And even if they do bring in a good law, let's just pretend, so they do bring in a good law, it's going to get amended in the lower house, it's going to get amended in the upper house. And so how can we be sure that a good law won't turn into a bad one? Next slide. So what do we need to do? In effect, the great thing about being the last speaker is I'm just going to be telling you to do what all the other speakers have already told you. Get focused. So we need to take action before they make it to the party room. Get active. You need to be, like Michael said, and well done, Michael, contact all your local members repeatedly and regularly, telling them you oppose the laws, in person if better, and tell them that this will affect how you vote at the next election. We need to get loud. Tell everyone you know. Go out, take this information, get out there, bombard everyone you know with it about the consequences of these laws and encourage them to do the same thing. We need to persist until the election. There needs to be consequences of the ballot box. MPs who support your rights, you need to support them. MPs who don't support your rights, you need to campaign against them. Because the bottom line is this, MPs care about votes, and that's all they care about. I'm sorry, but that's the truth, okay? If they don't think they're going to lose votes at this next election, they're going to do nothing about it. If they don't think they're going to lose any votes over all your parental rights, they're going to do absolutely nothing about it, okay? So you need to make them realise that supporting these laws will cost them the votes big time. That's the only way to protect our rights as parents and our children. Next slide. So I want to finish by talking about the forgotten people, the ones that no one wants to care about. Many kids with same-sex attraction or gender confusion don't want these desires. Many kids I don't want to feel this way, mum and dad. Can I get help? And if we don't help them, how many of them are going to kill themselves? The kids that survive and don't kill themselves are going to become adults with same-sex attraction and gender confusion. They still want help. If they don't get help, then some of them will kill themselves. And the people that have been able to get help, as I've shown, have better health long-term, as well as reductions in suicide. So rather than preventing suicides like the Rainbow Lobby tries to say, conversion therapy laws are only going to increase suicide because the treatment that stops them killing themselves, they can't access. So what are you going to do if one of your children has these problems? Wouldn't you want them to get help? Okay? But these laws will take away that right from your child, increasing the risk of long-term self-harm and suicide, and that's why we have to oppose them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Con. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could also make a request once more, everybody please resume your seats, and if we can keep the chat minimal, that would be great. The next speaker I'd like to present is Dr. Mohammed Abdul Sattar. He's a Sydney-based entrepreneur, and he works in the pharmaceutical retail industry space. Hailing from Macquarie University, he's currently doing a PhD in management, and he's involved in many community and local social affairs, and frequently advocates for people's freedoms. If I could welcome him to the stage, please, with a loud round of applause.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. Brothers and sisters, thank you very much. Respected scholars, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, thank you very much for attending and giving up your time and supporting this important cause. I understand that it is getting a little bit loud. We are almost done with the program, so please exercise a bit more patience. We're almost done. If you do feel that you have to take a phone call or speak about something that is not related to the event, please have respect for those that are around you that do want to listen, and have respect for the rest of the speakers who have given up time to produce this material for everyone's benefit. Please take your phone calls outside, and please pay respect for the rest of the speakers until the end of the event. Thank you.